Hello everybody, so today I've been flying in X-Plane 11 in VR. Before we start, be warned that there will be a lot of head moving in the video as I was trying to do things as I would in real life. So if you're prone to motion sickness, you might want to skip this video, and apologies if it's a bit unpleasant to watch. So this is in Cambridge, UK, a place where I flew in real life quite a lot before the lockdown. I'm flying a Cessna 172 and I'm using True Earth scenery from Orbix. So the plane has us on runway 05 already. I configured a left crosswind of it's 11 knots at 0 degrees, so at runway 05 that will be half crosswind, let's say. So without further ado, let's get things going. Unlock the handbrake and throttle full in, heels on the floor at this point in real life, and the rudders in the game to me are very unrealistic, so I'm struggling a bit with keeping it straight. Airspeed over 55, so you start rotation and you can see aileron is going into wind because we have a left crosswind. I am pretty impressed with the scenery from Orbix, I have to say. It looks fairly similar to how things look up there in real life. It definitely looks a lot better than what X-Plane 11 comes with out of the box. So yeah, we fly to 500 feet. At 500 feet we look under the wing and prepare to turn onto crosswind. There are a few issues with the realism in this simulator. I'm using the SimCoder's Cessna 172, which is definitely better than the X-Plane C172, but it still has a few issues. So now I'll pull the power because I've reached 1,000 feet. In real life, when you pull the power like this, the nose of the plane will naturally drop a bit because you have less air flowing over the elevators. In the game I'm finding I need to trim a lot more to actually get the plane pointing to where it would go naturally in real life. Another problem is generally rudder control, especially on the ground, as I've mentioned, but also in the air. In real life, when you climb the plane, when you're putting in full throttle, you need to press the right rudder to counteract the yaw that the extra power is producing in the plane, and the game doesn't really do that. So I was pressing right rudder on the climb up, but I was actually causing the plane to fly unbalanced because of that. I was just doing that out of habit, really. Anyway, so now we're on downwind, doing the power checks, keeping the doing the pre-landing checks and keeping the plane in trim and everything. Scenery is quite good, as I was saying. For example, you can see a golf course to the left that looks pretty much like in real life. I suspect most of this imagery is taken from satellite pictures or something. So turning base now. Pull the power as we're turning base because we want to slow down the plane so that we can put down the flaps. So at 80 knots we can put down the flaps, 20 degrees of flaps. Trim the plane so that we're aiming for 70 knots. And again, I mean, I'm needing a bit more trim here than I would in real life. The plane isn't responding to throttle changes the way it would in real life. It's a lot better than the original X-Plane Cessna, but it's not quite there. But it's good enough to practice, so I mean, I can't really complain. It's something that a few years ago you wouldn't have. So now we're on base, we're descending. We usually aim for around 700 feet in the circuit here to turn to final. You can see Cambridge slightly to the left, and as we turn to final, put down 30 degrees of flaps. In real life, when you put down 30 degrees of flaps, the nose would just drop, and you would feel the plane slowing down quite considerably, because they add quite a bit of drag. Not happening as much here, the plane didn't slow down as much, and still having to trim quite a bit. There's left crosswind, so the plane is currently yawed into the wind, and as we get down, I am a bit high and fast, to be honest. It's not quite as I find it a bit harder than in real life. So we'll now gently yaw so that we're straight, and then control the crosswind with rolling into it. So drop the left wing into the wind, and now we start flaring. The stall and flare dynamics, I have to say, are quite good in the sim. Flaps up, power in. I get struggling just a bit with the rudders. It's 55 knots, and then we rotate, and the same thing again. Wing rolls into the crosswind, and you can see the balance ball is actually showing quite a lot of left unbalance. In real life, you wouldn't have that problem. I was pressing the right rudder, because in real life you actually need to counteract for the air rotating around the plane and pushing on the left side of your tail fin, basically. So yeah, that's one thing that I really wish would have been done better in the sim. But the scenery again is just like the roads here and the roundabouts and everything, they look pretty much like in real life, and it's a massive improvement over what X-Plane 11 does. So just gonna do a second circuit now, and then we'll go to land. Again, pull the power, push the nose down to fly level. One thing I haven't mentioned so far, so I'm using a yoke for the actual flight control, for the yoke obviously, but then for everything else, as you can see, I'm just using my VR controller, which is very nice. All the controls are simulated correctly, so I'm just moving the controller around the dashboard to control throttle and trim and flaps and everything, and it just works. You do need to look at the controls a lot more, because you don't have the haptic feedback that you would in real life. In real life you wouldn't look down every time you're trimming the plane, but you know, it's not quite perfect. So we're on downwind again. We do the pre-landing checks here, and check the brake pressure, check the mixture, check that the fuel is on both tanks and sufficient, and check the instruments, check that QFE is correct, and then we're looking for a reference point to turn base again. This is quite a wide circuit that I'm flying here, and I do admit I prefer the wider circuits in reality when I fly Cambridge. Some people fly a lot tighter than I do in the circuit, but I do like the time to set everything up nicely and not be rushed onto base, basically. Flaps going down, 20 degrees again. At this point in real life, it's quite, I find this part of the circuit quite intimidating, because you're flying fairly low, 700 feet, just above built up areas, houses, and all sorts of things. and especially on a clear day they feel really close. I remember when I was first doing my flying lessons and I was flying this part here, it was just so scary. I was always ending up too high up because I was just kind of subconsciously I was just refusing to descend to get closer to those houses. And then we have these lakes to the right. In real life you always get a sink above these lakes because they're not radiating as much heat as the rest of the ground, so the plane sinks a bit. Anyway, you don't get that in the sim. So this approach is slightly better. Last one was a bit too high. I'm coming in at a fairly smooth slope, 65 towards 70 knots. Should be 65, but you know. And the same thing, we roll into the wind and keep the nose straight. Start flaring, and then you want to touch with the wheel that is into wind first, and then the other one. Drop the nose, let it settle, pull the flaps up, and then we're gonna taxi. And this is where things started going a bit wrong because I just can't get used to the rudders in this game on the ground. Might be the actual rudders that I have. So I have Thrustmaster T-rudder pedals, and there's almost no springiness in them. You know, in real life those pedals have quite strong springs pulling them back towards the center position, plus the actual resistance of the front wheel on the ground. So you easily feel how much you should be pressing in. But with these rudders, they're not pushing back at all. So I literally find myself accidentally pressing the rudder a bit without even knowing, just because they're so. I wonder what's here in the grass. So, whoops. Yep. Yeah. So this is what I was saying. Of course, I'm blaming the technology. You know, it's the proper thing to do. So they even made the grass link to the right. There's a grass link it's going straight into the general aviation parking here. The airport buildings are fairly accurately simulated, but they look a bit like what I know, they look like what they actually looked in reality, maybe in the 60s or something. There are a few extra bits and bobs in real life that aren't here in the game. Yeah, and still driving in the grass. I'm still, not driving, still taxiing in the grass. Don't mind that. This is all fine. It's all under control, kind of. Good thing there's nobody else around. But yeah, so this is it is a pretty good solution for practicing now that we can't really go flying with the lockdown. It's not perfect. I do sometimes wonder if I'm maybe sort of decalibrating myself for the real thing, but if you try to remember what you should be doing instead of just trying to please the game, if that makes sense, I think it's pretty good. And also it's really good for instrument flying, but that's not what I was doing today. But you know, like the GPS and everything works, so all the instruments. So yeah, now we've stopped in the parking area, general aviation parking. Let's pull the handbrake, and this is the normal stopping procedure. Stop the avionics first because you don't want to burn the radio, and then pull the mixture out, and then the keys and the master switch. So yeah, thanks for watching, and if you do get your hands on a setup of X-Plane 11 in VR, I do recommend you try it because it's overall it is quite good. And thank you, and have a nice day.